All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm James Horvath and the 2021 president for AIA Las Vegas chapter. As we're trying to wrap up the end of the year here, it's been a pleasure to be introducing each one of our committees this year, as that's been our focus and really the purposes of each one and the highlights that we've looked at each month. This month we have a presentation put together by our Government Affairs Committee for AIA Las Vegas. And before I get to the introduction of the committee chair, I would just like to say a few thank yous to our evening sponsors. Tonight is brought to our membership through sponsors or visionary sponsors, who are Knit Studios, Nevada Sales Agency, Pensa Building Group, and Clyde Jubal Wald, as well as our platinum sponsors, Harris Consulting Engineers, TJK Consulting Engineers, Bergman Walls and Associates, and Grand Canyon Development Partners. The Government Affairs Committee is chaired by Chris Lujan, who I'd like to turn the presentation over to tonight so he can introduce tonight's event and welcome our distinguished panel.
Thank you, James. Good evening. My name is Chris Lujan, and I'm the chair of the Government Affairs Committee here for AIA Las Vegas. Tonight, myself and Mr. Mike Hillerby are on the line welcoming our guest, distinguished membership. Tonight, in which we talk about the role of advocacy and the importance in which it serves on behalf of supporting architecture and architects across the state. So tonight, we'd like to welcome our guests, distinguished panel, including Henderson Councilwoman Michelle Romero, Clark County Commissioner Justin Jones, Clark County Commissioner Jim Gibson, and Nevada Assemblyman Howard Watts. Each of them brings a unique perspective in which we find that there's a unique overlap with architects and how we can celebrate a shared conversation with one another in advancing the efforts of advocacy on behalf of architects. First, I'd like to introduce Councilwoman Michelle Romero. You may know Michelle Romero for her role in the Henderson Redevelopment Agency, strong leader of Council Member Ward 1, and as a local owner of a consulting firm specializing in economic development and planning issues. Additionally, former Nevada State Senator and current Clark County Commission member for District F, Justin Jones. Justin is a partner at Jones Lovelock, a local law firm specializing in construction law. Welcome, Clark County Commissioner Jim Gibson from District G. Mr. Gibson is a former 3-term mayor for the city of Henderson and has a background in business and law as well. Lastly, we'd like to welcome State Assemblyman Howard Watts. Howard represents District 15 and is the chair of the Natural Resources Committee and vice chair of the Infrastructure Committee, as well as the owner of a public relations committee serving business organizations. Apologies, quite the distinguished panel. And again, since we're doing this remotely, a little bit unique circumstances in how we go ahead and proceed with this conversation. But I'd like to go ahead and start with Councilwoman Romero. Ms. Romero, if you would go ahead and share with us a little bit about your experience in redevelopment in Henderson and how that has allowed you to interact with architects in the Valley.
So as you alluded to in the introduction, I worked at the city of Henderson. I retired from there 6 years ago, almost 6 years ago. Prior to that, I was the redevelopment manager of the city of Henderson for 9 years. I was in redevelopment a total of 16 years, but led the efforts for the last 9 years I was here. So many of the projects you might be familiar with in Henderson, Water Street District, Cadence, Union Village and Henderson Hospital, those were all my projects that I negotiated and brought in with a team of phenomenal people here at the city and on the other side of the table. And so as a result of that, many times throughout my work here at the city, we've worked with architects and brought them in to do design charrettes and visioning boards to see what people might like to see in their specific area and what types of design codes would be best for the area, especially on Water Street. We really worked closely with a series of architects to bring their expertise and advice in to see what would honor our heritage here and at the same time bring us into the future and create that design guidelines that would help us achieve our goals for Water Street. And we were very, very successful. If you haven't been down here in a while, you should come down to Water Street. It's exciting and active, and everything that we had planned for close to 20 years ago, starting 20 years ago, it's coming to fruition. And a lot of that is due to the time and effort that architects put into helping us guide our vision. We love the way that architects can also tout our design criteria here and how it is to develop in Henderson and the roles you guys play with the design team and the constructions team to make sure that everybody's on the same page moving forward toward the same goal, and that we have a cohesive development, and we see the quality that we have come to expect here in Henderson, and we love working with you all.
Thank you, Councilwoman Romero. As you mentioned, Water Street is certainly thriving. I think that's certainly in part to your efforts to it, as well as former Mayor Gibson, who we have on. Goodness, I keep on saying that. Commissioner Gibson, how can architects more effectively communicate with leadership? You've certainly had exposure to many architects throughout your time serving the community. How can we better communicate?
It's critical that I think it's critical that we have occasion to really spend time with architects on projects. There are so many projects that we see that are represented by lawyers and others. And when we do see the team, it's not often the architect that is in front of us. Most often it's an engineer responding to a public works issue or some other design element, but not so much the architects, while we see them occasionally. As mayor, I went to, it was really interesting. I was invited to go to a LEED Foundation roundtable that lasted a few days in La Jolla, California, where 9 cities had been invited to bring a serious, or not serious, but a compelling issue that we were dealing with. That the group that included 4 or 5 architects and other city planner people, and discuss it and then engage in a conversation that might lead us to some conclusions. And as a result of that, we actually did some things that made sense. We were concerned about how do we bring the plaza at City Hall out to Water Street? What do we need to do? And recently, they've done more, some of which was suggested early on, but that we didn't do at the time. But it was really fun. I'll tell you, maybe the funnest part of the whole thing was that there were 8 other cities that had bridges that they did. In one case, several cases, they wanted to decommission a bridge. In other cases, they wanted to reopen bridges. When we got to me, the great thing was that I had a question about Water Street. And so it at least gave me something that I could relate to in the context of the folks that were there. And I think my experience now in working with architects, both at the city and at the county, is that when we have an opportunity to get with them, actually sit down and try and iron out a problem, their role is really helpful to us. Most of the time it's really helpful. We have a transit-oriented design project on Maryland Parkway that was giving the commissioner fits, and that district is right next to mine. And we sat with the architect for 2.5 hours and solved the problem. And we could not get there any other way. We have a situation, similar kind of thing, where we were having great difficulty as we were working on a major project that is out on Las Vegas Boulevard. It is up today and operating, but had we not had the architect at the table, we just simply would not have been able to get enough energy in the room to solve the problem. So my experience is the more the architects are involved, the better off we are.
That's a great story, and just hearing the feedback of the architects and the role of the built environment, it's great to hear your perspective. Certainly, looking at Commissioner Jones, your background in managing open spaces, natural parks, providing access to the outdoors, oftentimes architects are engaged in the built environment, but maintaining the natural environment is something that I believe many architects as stewards of sustainability look to as well. Can you speak to your experience and perhaps sharing some of your natural resource background?
Sure. Definitely was part of my interest in the Clark County Commission was my advocacy work before on behalf of Save Red Rock and other types of projects. And one of the things that I immediately started working on when I joined the County Commission 3 years ago was an effort to reform our comprehensive master plan. It hadn't been updated in 30 years. And along with my colleague, Commissioner Gibson today, we adopted unanimously Transform Clark County, which was our long overdue update to the comprehensive master plan. And that incorporates a lot of the principles of open space, of infill development, and making sure that we incorporate sustainability into the way we do planning decisions. And I think that it's really an opportune time for architects to get involved in this process. We set out to first update our comprehensive master plan, and then part 2 of Transform Clark County will get into the details of Title 30, which is our development code. And so we are having those initial discussions right now. And I think that it's absolutely critical that architects be involved in those discussions. The reality is that most of us elected officials are don't have training in architecture. And so when we try to work through the types of issues that we face, we don't know what we're talking about. And so it'd be important to have the experts in architecture and engineering at the table as we reform our development code to make sure that the end product is something that's going to serve our community for decades to come.
Certainly, and looking at the scale, working from, say, Councilwoman Romero's perspective and Councilman Gibson's, perhaps here in Henderson at a smaller scale, into a county level impact. Assemblyman Watts, certainly as a longtime resident of the Las Vegas Valley, you've seen many transformational changes through the valley. And now at the state level, you're seeing how, in fact, development is impacting across the many great communities we have here. How do you view the role of development while looking at your background in sustainability as a champion as well? How do you balance those priorities?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's something that we're going to be wrestling with for the foreseeable future. And, I was born and raised here. I've seen the valley grow. Of course, I think in the lead up to the Great Recession, that kind of breakneck pace of growth, sometimes it was hard for even the physical infrastructure, let alone the social infrastructure, to catch up. And while the recessions that we have seen here have been devastating, I think it's given us some time to step back and reflect on the kind of community that we want to see. And so, and then in particular, as we look at climate change, as we look at drought, the impacts on our water resources, we know that we have to take a more sustainable approach in order for our community to survive and thrive into the future. And so, obviously there are initiatives that are happening at the local level in city and county governments. We're working on initiatives at the state level as well. And, we need to think about how we grow in a smart way, in a way that minimizes our impact on the resources, both from kind of the perspective of preserving natural spaces for us to enjoy, as well as preserving, our water supply and other critical needs that our communities have. So, I think, I try not to step too much on the toes of my friends in local government who are working on zoning and other issues that help influence the way development occurs. And of course, the fact that there has to be interest in and a market for different projects that are being brought forward. But I see a great opportunity to work more with architects at the state level particularly because of the range of skills that are involved. I think when we get to the state level, it's higher level design of policy that helps guide our state to where we want to end up. And I think, it would be helpful to work in collaboration with architects in creating that vision, that joint vision together of what a sustainable community looks like. And then, also having the nuts and bolts experience in kind of what it takes to build that out can really help inform the details of the policies that we're putting together in order to make that a reality.
Absolutely. You mentioned that there's specific policies that you see the many members who are joining this conversation right now virtually, who I'm sure are very excited to figure out how can we help engage. It's a question to each of you. What is something that architects as local practitioners can do to better communicate and connect with you guys and potential policies that you're looking ahead to? And what might those policies, as you look down the road, be, where we probably have a variety of folks out here who are just very talented in a wide number of things. How can we help manage that?
Well, I don't know if you're directing that to anyone in particular, but let me just try it. We all know that the drought is so deep that the effects of the drought really couldn't be effectively modeled by anyone. There is nothing to compare it to in our experience. But now we're in a place where there are things that must be done. And Commissioner Jones and I serve on the Water Authority. I think much of the discussion is going to begin there, but there will be a whole lot of follow-on activity at all of the cities and at the county. It'll be important to have the architecture community raise its voice, be heard. If architects have home builder clients that rely upon their expertise, we would encourage them to not to wait to be asked, but to weigh in and to advocate and help them discover that not every change needs to drive the price of the housing up, that there are opportunities to do incredible things that would enable us to be more responsive to the challenges that we face with water, for instance, right now. And I'm pleased to know that there's really an invitation by Assemblyman Watts to the architecture community to reach out to the state and influence things. I mean, we work together as local government and the state government and legislators, whether we're commissioners or councilwomen or we're assemblymen, we're all working together. But the one thing that we all hope for is that there is a really educated input at things that we're going to be subject to, things that are going to impact us day after day. And none of us wants to get out there on a limb all by ourselves and not really have the expertise. So if there ever were a time when the entire community of architects needed to stand up and be heard, it's now.
Thank you for that insight. So often from our side, we hear issues of energy and carbon reductions, which are aspects that are absolutely important in the discussion of sustainability. But I think our region is so uniquely impacted by the limited water resources that we have. You're spot on. Assemblyman Watts, is there anything at the state level that is coming up for discussions or policies that architects can help reach out to discuss this from our members here in the South and even up in the northern portion of the state?
Absolutely. And I'll build off of some of Commissioner Gibson's comments. Many folks may be aware that the legislature passed policy earlier this year, phasing out the use of non-functional turf in Southern Nevada. And that is in fact retroactive and a first policy of its kind in the nation. Obviously, some of the building codes for new construction have already been or on the leading edge of water conservation, drought tolerant, desert friendly landscapes. But I think, we're going to be continuing to look at that issue when it comes to drought and water conservation You know, and I think at the statewide level, we need to look all over. Here in Southern Nevada, because of some of the unique positioning of our city next to Lake Mead, we have the ability to use water recycling. And so we're really trying to focus on some of those evaporative uses outdoors and how we get that usage down. In other communities, it's important that we look at indoor and outdoor conservation of water, both. Looking a little bit bigger from the climate perspective as we continue to work on emissions reductions, you know, we need to continue to find ways to be smart and sustainable, in our buildings, right? And we've looked at getting emissions down in energy use, but we also have to look at getting down the emissions used to heat water, heat spaces, cook. And I think those are going to be conversations that continue to develop. And those are ones that we, again, need the vision and the information from the architects to help make the best possible decisions. And I think, you know, just looking a little bit broader at being climate adapted communities. So we need ideas on, you know, what are the standards, what are the policies, what are the incentives, and what are the barriers to having climate adapted communities. And, you know, again, it's drought and water smart. It's reducing the emissions and kind of footprint of our built environment. It's also about dealing with heat as we see increased urban heat. What are the ways that we can try and mitigate that through design and through building? Those are all things that I'm interested in working on at the state level in partnership with our local governments and certainly in partnership with architects and other experts in the field.
Thank you. Commissioner Jones, your time on the Water Board. Certainly the forecasts are challenging. We really don't know what to expect in the future. How do you, as officials, speak towards maintaining the sense of excitement, interest, and growth in the county while at the same time managing some of these issues?
Great question. It's something that we've been talking a lot about on the SNWA board, and quite frankly, in our zoning meetings. I know Commissioner Gibson and Commissioner Naft brought it up today on a big warehouse industrial project. I think you'll see in January, the SNWA board is going to have a broad discussion on a panoply of conservation measures that are going to be under consideration. And I think we're going to have some hard discussions about development and how much development we can support here in Southern Nevada if we don't take an additional conservation measures and or find additional supplies. Our federal delegation was successful the last 2 weeks in securing some additional funding to work with the LA Water Authority to do the same type of water recycling that we do here in Southern Nevada. We really are on the cutting edge of water recycling around the country. So I think that you're going to see some serious conversations about what that looks like. Assemblyman Watts referenced evaporative cooling. I think that's definitely something that's going to be on the auction block here very soon. And Commissioner Gibson raised it even today in our zoning meeting. So I think that there's going to be some serious discussions that the architects need to be involved in about how do we accommodate those types of additional measures that are coming our way here in the very near future.
Chris, could I just tag on to something that Commissioner Jones just said? And I really like the way he said it, because making improvements to the condition of things and continuing to grow are not mutually exclusive. It's all about what are we willing to do now to ensure that this economy doesn't weaken, that we are able to keep it strong, and all of the good that happens as a result of growth in our valley, for instance, is something that we want to keep. We want to continue to enliven this community in every way that matters. But it's critical to us that we make some really tough choices now that will enable that. And if we do that, we can continue to grow. It's not a matter of how many people can live here. It's more a matter of what are the practices that are damaging, challenging, and consumptive of the water resource that we have. And so Justin nailed it when he said the things that, the choices that we have to make include whether we want to keep growing. And there's only one way to do that, and that is to be responsive to the challenges that the drought and all that is around the drought have presented to us.
Certainly. Go ahead, sorry.
Chris, Mike Hillerby, I just wanted to chime in. I think Assemblyman Watts brought up a really interesting issue, and I get to work sort of in both worlds, having represented AIA at the state level a long time, and my colleagues in our Kemper-Kroll office in Southern Nevada dealing with our elected representative guests, Jennifer Lazovich, Chris Kempfer, and Tom Amick, and the rest of that team at the local level. And we often see that tug of war between the state and local level about local autonomy to some extent to make those decisions. Do you all see an opportunity for a better relationship between the legislature? And I think about things like coming for turf removal, the transportation electrification provisions of SB 4, I'm going to get the number wrong, of the last session, Chris Brooks, putting money to be sure that we have charging, electric vehicle charging near multifamily and other areas, traditionally underserved communities, where nobody envisioned that decades ago when some of these places were built. Do you see a world where there is some more cooperation and sort of less of the defensiveness that naturally occurs when you've got the differences between state and local? And anybody could answer that one.
I'll take an initial stab at that. Thanks for the question, Mike. I think so. I won't be too Pollyanna-ish about it. We have a diversity of communities, and there's going to be a diversity of opinions, and so there's inevitably going to be differences and occasionally conflicts that come up. But speaking from my perspective, and especially with some of the folks on this panel, we all realize the impacts of a changing climate on our communities. We all realize the limited natural resources, and I think those issues, even though climate change can be a political issue at times, the impacts that we're seeing and the realities that we need to adapt to for our communities to survive and thrive into the future, I think everybody realizes it transcends partisanship, it transcends region, it transcends jurisdiction. And, I've seen a lot more momentum where we're all moving in a similar direction on tackling some of those challenges in particular. And I think it's going to take partnership and action and investment at all levels of government in order to make the changes that are necessary. For example, with the turf changes, so that was a state policy kind of aimed at Southern Nevada, but developed in coordination with the Southern Nevada Water Authority, who also did robust outreach and engagement and has an ongoing stakeholder process with affected businesses and stakeholders in the community. And so my commitment is to continue that engagement and to coordinate whenever possible so that we can kind of move together in a forward direction. I do want to be able to provide some momentum and some guidance from the state level, but also just recognize and provide that room for local governments to implement things in a way that makes sense for their communities.
I would actually agree with that, with what the Assemblyman said. Henderson is wanting to lead the way for turf removal and things like that. We're already making plans to start doing that in some of our very large areas, and having those discussions on how we can best make that happen and how we can coordinate and promote the fact that working together from state level on down is going to be better for everyone. And if we're all on the same page, going the same direction, telling the same story, people are much more likely to buy into it and not look at it as a partisan thing or as a mandate thing or as anything other than we're trying to make our community better and more beautiful and more sustainable for everyone. And I think it's wonderful that at the state level, they're looking to work with the communities as well, the municipalities. It's something that's needed, and it's something that he's exactly right. It shouldn't be a divisive issue. It's something that we all should be talking about to make sure that we're doing all that we can at every level to make sure that we are protecting our resources. And at the same time, where architects can play a big part of that, we've got to remove all this turf, but we still have to make it look nice. We still have to make sure that there are areas of shade that are attractive, that there are play areas, that there are places along our roadways that can't have grass, but they have to have something that's attractive. And that's where your background and your input would be invaluable to helping us come up with new and innovative ideas on how to make that happen. Especially for some of our master plan communities that have these gorgeous entryways that are mostly grass right now. How can we keep that level of quality and beauty while at the same time being responsible with our resources and complying with the new law?
And I'll just chime in on this one. I think one, COVID has forced relationships between state, local, and federal officials in a way that I don't know was there before. When on I would say the day 3 of COVID, the city and county and state had to come together to throw up a temporary shelter over at Cashman because we needed to do it to serve the needs of our homeless population. And those types of relationships between the jurisdictions have only blossomed since then. And I think as we are all deciding how we're going to spend our ARP money, as we all figure out how we're going to spend what's intended to be hundreds of millions of dollars in federal funding for infrastructure and hopefully Build Back Better, coordination is key. And I know that many of us have been involved in those discussions amongst the local jurisdictions, with our state officials and with federal officials, so that we do it in the best way possible. And I think architects play an important role there, right? If we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars that the city, the counties, and the state have and will be devoting to affordable housing, for example, or broadband, or additional infrastructure projects, architects are going to be involved in basically every part of that. And so I think that their voice as we move forward into these federal funds in the next 5 years are going to be very critical.
Mike, I think that's a really good question for us all. I think I've been around long enough to know that there are times when we've hoped the legislature would just happen and not have any effect on us. We think we know best and we're doing what we think is right. What we've discovered over time is that there really are places where state law needs to change. And if it changes in a way that is coordinated with us, we can multiply the good that we can do. And that's what we need to be working towards. So it's on us when it comes to issues that come up at the legislature, whether we learn about them beforehand. Hopefully we learn about them beforehand. If we do, then that gives us an opportunity to provide everything we know about how it affects us on the ground. And then we can work with the legislature to figure out the right way to implement policy. And that all by itself informs what the policy ought to be, really. It does us no good at all to adopt policy that can't go anywhere as a practical matter. So I think that the more we work with the legislature, the better off we are. I remember as a kid, I would hear people say, the legislature's in session, have you got your hard hat? And it always offended me because my dad was in the legislature for 30 years and I thought they knew everything. Then I was elected mayor and I flipped and, came under the influence of the bureaucrat in local government. And I've discovered over time that we are so much better off if we will take the initiative, each of us, to reach out, inform one another, and then do everything we can possibly do to make sure that every single angle, every single issue is fully vetted. Then we can work together to make things happen. So I think that's a great question. We've all got to work together better than we ever have.
Given the unique collaboration that you all are mentioning between local and state entities, some infrastructure projects that you guys have discussed, perhaps in collaboration with one another, looking down the road, whether it be facing water, whether it be facing infrastructure related to information technology or high-speed rail. I know is something that's really large down here in Southern Nevada right now. What can we expect on the future in terms of architects' involvement in infrastructure discussions?
I'd say on the affordable housing side, we're going to be spending hundreds of millions of dollars there. And I think there's a real opportunity to be creative in that space. We have this notion that affordable housing is just, ugly buildings to fit as many people in as you can. And we at the county, we wanted to do something a little bit different in terms of providing an opportunity for families to buy a home and do something in the single family residential space. And so we put an RFP out there, and we announced our first of those projects. And the builder came in with really interesting designs, something that really fits into the landscape here. And I think there's going to be more and more opportunities in the affordable housing space, for example, in transit-oriented development, for architects to do something creative that maybe wasn't there before.
And in connection with the housing piece, we are stressed always when it comes to providing transitional housing. So when we have success with folks and we're trying to transition them into something more permanent, we're kind of stuck with whatever is out there. And we've been doing some creative things. We've taken some motels and we're renovating them, trying to make for ourselves some options. But there probably are some things we've never thought about. We're reacting right now because we're so deeply in a hole. I think we're, what, Justin, is it 60,000 or so units short when it comes to affordable housing? And
80,000.
80,000 short, and we're thousands upon thousands short when it comes to transitional housing, which is a real problem. We're going to get up in the morning and we're going to see transitional housing needs. We're going to deal with the people over and over and over every day. Any of you who have expertise in these kinds of things, please step forward. We're really anxious to hear what you have to offer.
And I would just say, even with the infrastructure bill that was just passed, and hopefully Build Back Better Act will be enacted as well, there are going to be a lot of opportunities. And building off some of the comments that Commissioner Jones gave, we've had to talk a lot about and collaborate, and that's happening, as he mentioned, with the American Rescue Plan dollars, because each of our governments has received funds for different things, and we want to make sure that we're not duplicating and that we're actually coordinating in order to meet some of those needs. Infrastructure funding is also going to stack onto that, as well as Build Back Better. And I think big picture, there's just a lot of opportunity. From kind of the climate and sustainability perspective, everything from major investments towards electric vehicle infrastructure, clean energy, and continuing to integrate that into residential and commercial properties. The expansions of rail, of public transit, funding for public safety, roadway improvements. For upgrades to roads and bridges. And I think that all of that combined provides a lot of funding and opportunity for different modes for people to travel around. And again, going back to some of the other things, how do we make sure that we have that they're shaded, that they're safe, and that they work for people. So it's a very large amount of resources is coming, and probably some more on top of what we've got committed already is on the way. And I think it's just another huge opportunity for architects and others to work with us as we try and collaborate together to figure out how we leverage these things, and again, really look towards the community that we want to see and the community that we need to have in order to sustain ourselves moving forward, and stack and build those investments and weave them together to achieve that.
Yeah, timelines right now are so tight, and the demand is certainly out there for so many practitioners, whether it's architects, engineers, contractors. We see the importance of workforce development, training out there. Can you guys speak to the role of education and how we seek to achieve so many of these goals, and how we can inspire local youth to basically step up and build some of these roles for us so we can see that brighter tomorrow?
Some of the things that Henderson is doing, we have created the Community Education Advisory Board, where we work directly with schools, their administration, their teachers, to identify areas of need that aren't being addressed. And then we provide grants to those schools directly. We're also partnering with the Clark County School District on their vocational and technical schools, and developing their course curriculum, and pairing that with what we know is coming to Henderson as far as advanced manufacturing and IT and some other health and science related jobs, so that we are preparing our children to enter the workforce prepared and ready to go. We've also invested in and partnered with the College of Southern Nevada to create a center of excellence for training for advanced manufacturing jobs. That was part of a bond that we put together, and we actually, architects were part of that package submittal that went in, so that we could pick a building that was not only useful but attractive and fit in with the environment. And we are focusing very heavily on education. It's something that is greatly needed in our valley. We have started our own preschool program. It's become fully accredited so that kids enter the school system, their kindergarten school system, prepared and ready to go and able to read ahead of schedule, so that they have a positive school experience. But again, it's a regional thing. It takes all of us working together. We can't just focus on kids in one area. It has to be all of our kids having these same opportunities. And right now, it's an issue in our valley. It can be greatly improved at this point.
And I guess I'll just say, at the state level, obviously, education is hugely important. I think the state has really the dominant role to play in setting up some of the structures to make sure there's adequate resources flowing to education, K-12 and higher ed. Working with the state superintendent of public education, the governance for higher education, and members of the business community to align our education with our workforce development and economic development needs and goals, continuing to try and provide some of those solid policy frameworks from the state level, to make sure that we can improve our education and meet the needs that we have in our community, both from just kind of a civic standpoint, as well as from, again, developing the workforce that we need for our community.
From a perspective that is exclusively Southern Nevada, we need to work all of us more closely with the Clark County School District. And to the extent that architects can bring their training and their understanding of things that would be fascinating to kids into the classroom, and in other places where they have their full and undivided attention, it would be enormously valuable. All of us have to care about the kind of the beginning of the discussion about education. And it starts somewhere, but it makes its way through the classroom in the Clark County School District. And something has got to come from every one of us if we're to lift the performance of the school district that I graduated from. I came through, I think that Michelle and the Assemblyman likewise came through the Clark County School District. And there is value there. We've just got to find it and help them do a better job of spreading it around in a way that is meaningful. They need to, the district will work with us. We've had some difficulty in the past. I think that the pandemic all by itself has done some good for us. And we're hearing of good things that may come from partnerships with us. So yes, I think that there is a critical opportunity, but I would encourage your group to involve itself in discussions with the Clark County School District to see what you can add to the classroom experience.
Great. Well, again, I thank each of you for your time. I think this conversation obviously shows that there's much work to be done. So I'd like to end by asking each of you, if there's one specific area that you would like some practitioners to be able to reach out to you directly, how can we best connect with you individually?
So the question is, how do you connect with us? Is that what your question is?
Best go in-person meetings. Often that can be somewhat difficult these days. Reaching out by email, or are there specific other means in which we can connect?
Well, I think all of our offices are open to you. If there is any occasion that you want to meet with us, I know, at least I see firsthand, that Commissioner Jones opens his office and he's willing to take just about maybe every appointment that is requested. I do similarly. My colleagues do the same, and I'd encourage you to get with us, but we're also willing to meet you off our campus. So if there are circumstances that make sense, we can come to your offices. We can meet you in other places. And I would encourage that to happen. And there is an opportunity right now. We're looking at Title 30, the experience that Commissioner Jones discussed at the beginning. If there ever were a time that architects could make a difference when it comes to the way development rolls itself out, what it looks like, what it achieves, and how it accomplishes the priorities that we all have set pretty much similarly across the board, whether it's state or local government, this is that opportunity.
Yeah, I would just reinforce what Commissioner Gibson said. We all make ourselves available. I think elected officials in Nevada in general are well known for their accessibility. I know Commissioner Jones, I think folks are all sharing their direct contact information. I just shared the link to my publicly available page that has an email that I check, a phone number that I pick up. So, there's not really much standing in the way from people reaching out. If you're interested in following up with us, please do reach out. I want to thank AIA for helping bring us here. And so if there's other events or spaces that you think it would be helpful for us to go and talk to people and get feedback, I think we are all more than interested in doing that. And then we can also plug you into some of the meetings and processes that are ongoing within our different levels of government so that you can participate in that. So yeah, I would just encourage, don't hesitate to reach out and follow up with us, and we can help. We would love to be connected and can make connections, based on our areas of work and expertise.
Yeah, I'd just say there's a lot of opportunities to get involved in local government, state government. State government has a lot of different entities, boards that you can be appointed to. Clark County, we have informal working groups that are working on things like short-term rentals, like Title 30, but also more formal things like town boards and the Planning Commission, and those application process is ongoing right now. Having the expertise of an architect on a town board, I think, would be invaluable.
I agree. My door is always open. I've put my contact information up. But similarly, we have many boards and commissions that are available to architects, and we have architects already serving on some of our boards, especially for our redevelopment board. We have at least 2 that I know of, and possibly more architects that have served for a very long time on that board, to our great benefit. It has helped us immensely in moving forward with our Water Street District and the design and concepts that we're creating down here. They have done a wonderful job of making it a wonderful place to be. So I invite you all to get involved and to reach out and to participate as much as you possibly can.
Excellent. Councilwoman Romero, Commissioner Jones, Commissioner Gibson, and Assemblyman Watts, again, thank you so much for spending time with us this evening and sharing some insights with leadership.
Thank you for having us.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Goodness, so from an architect's perspective, to hear the support of our local officials, really bringing perspectives from local issues all the way to state issues, kind of recontextualizing the conversation to how us as architects and the AIA are working around these just constantly changing times. I'd like to bring in the discussion from the Government Affairs Committee perspective about how the AIA is speaking to advocacy, and with Mr. Hillby on the line with us as well, bringing his insight through the long time serving of experience with us as our lobbyist. Again, how can we help support your voice and engagement? Certainly this platform right now makes this conversation a little bit one-sided, and so I hope that those of you who are on the chat are able to share your perspective and questions. We will be checking those throughout. But I'd like to give an update as to what is happening with AIA in Nevada and the AIA in general in terms of advocacy, and let you know how we could use your help and support to get your voice and perspective shared through advocacy. So kicking off, so many of us are familiar with AIA serving and acting in regions. The WMR, the Western Mountain region, for so long has been the core of the region which serves Nevada. So the neighboring states recently have found out that, in fact, this perspective will be changing as the WMR formally will no longer be in existence in the years coming. So what we would share together through this region was a lot of shared issues and a collective voice, whether it be issues of growth, water scarcity, sustainability, just a myriad of topics that we're really challenged by in this area, are going to be focused back more inwardly to the individual states to certainly see how the AIA could represent those situations. And there's still going to be conversations between those of us in the region, but just having that platform to then take to national to share that collective voice is just going to be interrupted. All right, so again, what does it mean to have a regional identity and shifting that to the state itself? AIA Las Vegas here in Southern Nevada has had the opportunity to have a standing government affairs committee. Certainly we look to sharing these insights and perspectives as we have our monthly meetings, first Wednesday of each month. We have representation from AIA Northern Nevada as well, where they do not have a standing government affairs committee just yet. We want to make sure that the conversations that we're having are shared across the state. We understand many of the issues in politics are local. However, there's so many shared insights that we can exchange with one another, specifically issues of water, right? Here in Southern Nevada, the opportunity to recycle water, use gray water implementation is going to be a different conversation than the ability to do such in Northern Nevada. We have issues that are facing our communities different. Right now, both are certainly facing issues of growth, but how that growth is being managed in the North and South is certainly differing. And then how do we share an ambivalent voice? How do we get together and really make sure that what we're speaking represents the values of our membership? We welcome those of you to join our committees, whether it's government affairs or any of the others in the AIA Las Vegas, to really champion what are the attributes of the profession that you want to advance and how can you more directly feel that engagement. The opportunities by having AIA Nevada overall strengthened as a representative platform to AIA National really does allow for a more direct connection to DC. As we look ahead, what is the idea of statewide identity through these collective issues and a unified voice? As I mentioned earlier, currently AIA Northern Nevada and AIA Las Vegas have legislative action committees. That's something that is going to be further strengthened as we move ahead. And overall, AIA Nevada currently does have a government affairs committee. We work through the state and government network. We have representation for that, as well as the legislative action network. And tonight, he's not able to join us, but Jason Mendoza is leading the AIA Nevada Political Action Committee. So we do have a PAC, and that's something that has been around for a few years, although you probably haven't heard of it because it's just basically kind of fallen, and we're looking to advance that. We look to folks such as Eric Roberts, who really helped get the state on the playing field for these kind of conversations some years ago. And we just need to go ahead and take where he left that off and advance those efforts. So what does the AIA Las Vegas Government Affairs Committee look to do? Well, again, we try to promote the committee actions from the variety of committees in AIA Las Vegas to the overall AIA Nevada board. We understand that there's going to be moments where perhaps issues such as sustainability have very particular issues, such as carbon reduction, and they need a platform and a champion. And how can they take the collective concern of that committee to a larger group? But what we want to do is serve as that conduit for your committees and represented members to come together, perhaps produce a white paper or put together a policy that we can advance at a state level and have the backing of the AIA Nevada board. We understand that developing campaign platforms is challenging. Even tonight in our conversation with the various representatives, just having those conversations, it's a first step, but oftentimes we don't go beyond that. Those conversations kind of fall apart, and by the time that the assembly gets together, we can speak to Mr. Hillerby, we don't have our ducks in a row. We aren't sure about what exactly the policy platforms are going to be and what the priorities need to be. Few of us might have that awareness, but if we're going to have a collective voice overall, we really could benefit from having the energy of our membership behind us. Lastly, reestablishing the path. What will that take? It's going to take focus and dedication, and that's certainly something that Jason and Dosha will bring to the organization itself, and member contributions. I think one area that is still somewhat uncertain is what does that mean? AIA National does have in your annual membership contributions space to support the AIA National PAC, but each state has the opportunity to have their own, and so those funds are completely separate. So when we look at what it is for advocacy, we look to provide a more organized and strategic organization, and again, promoting the shared goals of our members at large. Lobbying is critical to this effort, and at this point, I'd like for Mike to be able to help step in and showcase, what our history and the lobbying efforts at the State Assembly have been.
Sure, thanks, Chris. It was interesting hearing that discussion from the local electeds and from Howard Watts, and I can think back to the time when Justin Jones was in the state Senate and was running the Red Rock bill. That was a huge fight. Prior to that, now Congresswoman Dita Titus, when she was in the Senate, had the Ring Around the Valley bill and a very large fight. I think it will be new information to some elected officials how much the architecture community cares about sustainability issues, and it's a good thing, but that's part of the education process we need to do and make sure that, hey, don't just think of us as buildings. Think of us when you're talking about water conservation programs. Think of us when you need other design help that may not make a lot of sense. I think Commissioner Gibson was really eloquent about that. There were things that only architects could help solve the problem. There will continue to be, and I appreciate Howard saying, you know, wasn't going to be Pollyanna. I met with him. We were talking about electric vehicles probably 3 or 4 years ago now. He said, you know, we really need building codes that either mandate or heavily encourage developers to include charging infrastructure in new multifamily housing, new single family housing, and commercial developments. So that's already in there. So we're prepared for that. That's part of the planning process. But he acknowledged that was probably not going to be something he could mandate from the legislature. That was going to require working with local governments. So in terms of some of the things we've done, they've been really focused on, I guess after this conversation, I would call the old fashioned things, indemnity and duty to defend, and construction defect liability, scope of practice, purchasing law changes and updates, and watching that, primarily defensive. We brought the duty to defend language in 2015, working with the engineers. That was a significant battle with local government. We fought them all session long and trying to get them to understand, get their insurance carriers to help educate them. Ultimately ended up, that bill passed unanimously, but it was a lot of work. So I think as we, and I go back to the last Great Recession, there was a lot of talk about shovel-ready projects. Some of you may have been around. I know John was, Kopolis and others had some giant pencils that the AIA made and talked about pencil-ready projects. And that's been however many years ago, 13 years ago or something now. Talking about pencil-ready projects as part of that education effort. So I'm glad you brought up the recovery funds and other money that the state is getting now. And it looks like there will be limited opportunities for the legislature to be involved. I think the governor's going to make a lot of recommendations. Things will go to interim finance committee, so that will kind of limit their involvement to a significant extent. And I'll stop talking. The idea of having this profession more out front on sustainability issues and how we become climate adaptable and climate ready communities is really appealing to me. And I think that puts you in a place where you really make some new friends and some new relationships with legislators that may not sit on committees we're normally in front of, or think about architects in that role. And then that allows us to build on, hey, you are all the local business people in those legislators' districts, because that's ultimately what so many of you are. The firms are smaller, even the larger ones. You're investing in the communities in which you reside and in which you have offices. So I'll stop there.
No, I think that's a great transition, because quite honestly, at the end, asking, well, how can we connect with you? I think so often the lack of continuity from architects, especially from the organization, basically is starting to have that separation between just realizing how easy it is and how certainly they want to hear our voice and engage. But the continuity that the AIA is looking to build back into this process and discussions, we need folks who want to be engaged in the process. We want our members who are really passionate about issues and hope to hold their local officials to task on this. Again, it starts with something so easy as an email, reach out through a phone call or at a public event. And I know these days, that's made it a little bit more difficult, but I don't think that's an excuse that we have anymore, as we start to hear more effectively that even they're connecting the local and state level more frequently than they have before. Again, the time is now for us to really just take this momentum and advance our voices.
And as much as I am honored to represent this profession and be there and be the voice, it's really important that individual members get to know their legislators. It just matters more, particularly as you get toward the end of the session and there's a lot going on. They're sort of tired of seeing all of us. And then one of you picks up the phone and calls. And I'll again single out John, because he's there in Carson City and has been very good at the legislative process, has always been available, can come to the building, put a face to that, come testify. Plenty of other members have over the years as well. And don't mean to leave anybody out, but he's literally just down the street. And that just makes a big difference, because then they just at some point get kind of tired of hearing from me. Let's hear from a real person that actually does this. So to the extent that you all can take these elected officials up on the offer you heard tonight, to reach out, to talk to them about the planning process, and to be offering help. how can we help you with what you're trying to do, and not just talk to them about, hey, we have this problem, there's something wrong we need to fix, we're not happy with something. How do we help you accomplish your goals? How can we help you on this water bill? We're really intrigued by what you're doing on water conservation. Well, we've got some ideas that might make that even better and make it easier to implement. So it's really important to be able to do that as well, to build those allies.
I also understand, you know, from our members' time, we have very little of it. And so we appreciate those who are taking the time right now to even listen to this presentation and stay engaged with us. But for those who are members who do want to engage, perhaps it's not at the local and state level. Some of them want to be engaged in discussions that are happening at the national level. And certainly the AIA provides a mechanism for that. Certainly through the state government network, there's ongoing conversations about policies and practice issues across the United States, other practitioners trying to get perspective from your state and how different legislative actions and local appeals are really impacting the profession and helping them, you know, basically say, hey, I'm trying to advocate on behalf of a certain bill. How can you help me based on your awareness? So many of us have attended grassroots for a period of time. Obviously, that was in Washington, D.C., and then it starts to shift locations. That program is still under basically a reconstruction, trying to figure out how to best serve the overall membership as we go from a digital back to in-person mechanism. Architects in Action this summer was a great online platform. Basically, I'm hearing that so many local practitioners across the country were having difficulties in connecting with their local officials, and so they've helped kind of basically build consortiums across the United States of how architects could basically push the issue and really make sure that that process was happening, because so many and other locations were just concerned that they would not have a voice at the table once the dust settled. And again, I think here in Nevada, we've been very lucky to have such close connection with our representative officials. And again, it's just the overall population of the state, but so many people are just a phone call away if it is. And speaking about phones, we're benefiting from a new opportunity called Phone to Act, in which so many of us are inundated daily with news and information, and it's hard to filter through. For those of us who are looking to be engaged in specific policy action, to engage those discussions, this Phone to Action will help us connect with our members and share those issues. Right now, we're looking at zero code. We're looking at how, in fact, the energy conservation codes are adapting, and how our state, who has taken on that latest IECC publication at the state level for adoption, and how will that start to impact perhaps local municipalities. That's a long conversation, and we really look to sharing that information with our members and sharing in those discussions as they come to us, hopefully, to be asking what's the current situation and what can we expect and how that impacts us. And again, I did mention it earlier, but the Nevada Political Action Committee is back. There's no doubt that having a fund in which we can take member contributions and use that to help build connections with officials is critical. Many people question what that engagement is like, what the role of a PAC is, especially for a group such as ours. And having served at a national level on the ARCA-PAC, it's paramount. There's no doubt that being able to connect with your local officials and help them if they are advocating on behalf of issues that you support, they have to campaign and build that campaign, fund that campaign, staff that campaign, and then hopefully successfully win that campaign and then carry on. Contributions go a long way in helping that process. So we understand that there's a renewed interest in this. And again, Jason and Doja will be heading this effort. What we want to start figuring out is how do we build this consistency through not only the government affairs, but the PAC. And certainly right now, the AIA in Nevada is looking to build consistent leadership through there so that we aren't caught off guard by leadership changes in these roles. Certainly we have leadership at each of the state and local chapter levels, and that's great. That should be changing through. We should bring new faces and bring that opportunity for all of our members to serve. But certainly when we have to build these longer term relationships with our local officials, having somebody sit in the committee chair for more than a year is something that we believe is going to help build that so that the transitions are easier to maintain and manage down the road. Certainly, Mike, your role as our lobbyist, you know, if you can speak to the importance of having a robust and effective PAC, just can you offer any insight?
Absolutely. I think at its core, it is an acknowledgement that we understand the job they have to do. We're asking them to understand your jobs as architects and the challenges of your business, what you need to survive, what you need to be competitive, what you need to be able to do the things you like doing. And it's just an acknowledgement that the fact of their life, the business of their office, if you will, is that campaign. And it's just an acknowledgement. We're never going to be a huge donor. We're a small profession. That ultimately is not as important as making an effort to do that. And again, what I can't overstress enough is then the commitment of each of us as individuals to follow that donation with your time to get to know a legislator. So when we need that call made, and then we've got a relationship and they say, this is someone I trust, it's someone I know them from my community, I know the kinds of things that they've helped our community, my constituents with, and I appreciate that they understand the job I have to do. So there's a trusted source for me, and the PAC helps.
Sure. And the PAC, again, we have to look in a larger perspective. This isn't a North versus South. We're not going to start leveraging campaign funds favoring one direction. Truly, this is an opportunity for us to collectively support the legislators and the representative officials who are going to best advocate on behalf of architects. So with that, I guess really, as we look together, a lot of stuff has been coming from our side. We understand that many of you guys right now are wondering, well, what next? How can I really have a voice in this? And maybe there's questions, comments, concerns that you guys have about how this comes together. You can expect that there will be surveys, moments for feedback, that we're going to be reaching out to you to get a better sense of how can we advocate on behalf of the members. Not everybody's going to want to attend every meeting or join a committee just to be able to say that they're part of it, and we respect that. At the same point, we understand that largely there hasn't been that kind of cross-section survey. There have been some questions asked about how can we represent this. And at a moment when AIA Nevada is truly going to grow stronger, because again, it's through consolidation of the Western Mountain region, and just by the fact that we're starting to be able to have seats at these positions on the committees, we really look how this evolves and advances the efforts of all of us collectively here in Nevada. At this point, for those of you who are online and choose to ask any questions, really appreciate any feedback you might have. Obviously, hop on the line directly, or I'll monitor the chat as well if anything comes through.
If anybody would like to ask the question live, you can raise your hand and I can unmute your line.
Question was really for your panelists. You know, Carson City has had quite a interesting effluent program forced on them by the EPA a lot of years ago. And I just wanted to know if any of the other communities in Nevada were doing something similar, but that was really a question for your panelists and not for you guys.
We'll have to advance that question, John. That's a good question. I know oftentimes just some of the red tape that hampers Southern Nevada just based on the Colorado Compact has made just any of the water contributions and how we capture potential options for not effluent and black water, but perhaps any gray water that might be able to be recycled on site or even through a municipality. There are a few unique individual entities here in the Valley who do that, but not at a large scale. And I guess, Mike, have you heard any potential upcoming legislation that starts to maybe push a little bit more on what some of the national limitations are that we face in efforts of state?
And I apologize, Chris, you broke up there at the end on issues about what?
So have you heard potentially any state level bills or suggestions that might want to push on some of the state mandates or national mandates that we face down here? Obviously, the Colorado Compact has a little bit of a precedent over so much of how things are managed down here. But as we start to see that the water scarcity is only going to grow, are there any legislators who are trying to say, hey, we might have to change how we manage water in Southern Nevada?
So I don't know about specific legislators or specific proposals, rather. I think you had one of them, Howard Watts, who was very interested in this issue. The Southern Nevada Water Authority is an incredibly politically powerful group. It's unlikely that the legislature is going to do much to change the way they operate. Just politically, it's pretty difficult when you're then sort of arrayed against all of the local governments in Southern Nevada. That said, again, I think the Water Authority has built some level of credibility by being proactive on things like turf removal. Right now, the Public Utilities Commission, as a result of legislation last session, is working on a docket with Southwest Gas. You may have seen some of that. I think there was a good report on that maybe yesterday at the Nevada Independent website. That came out of a bill that was originally drafted, would have severely curtailed the use of of gas in homes and construction over the next few years. This is really doing kind of a gas version of the resource planning that the electric utilities have to do. So we very, very well may see some changes there coming forward in mandates about how do we reduce the carbon footprint by reducing the amount of natural gas. Does that change the way new homes are built? Might there be, I have not heard this, but for example, a recovery plan money, might some of that be able to be used, or other funds to retrofit existing buildings? That's going to be a challenge, as you all know better than I do. You're not going to be able to easily take natural gas water heaters out of homes and stoves, forced air heat, and replace that with heat pumps and electric and other kinds of technologies inexpensively. Those aren't things people are going to be able to do. And yet I think everybody, the experts are telling us it's going to take that kind of bold action to make a real difference. So I have not seen any specific proposals, but again, I think I texted Howard just before the thing started and told him thanks. And he was really appreciative to be a part of this, and said he was so excited that these were issues on sustainability that architects cared about. So I think you have the right person, and we'll keep an eye on those, be it, effluent, water quality issues, conservation issues, and let you know. But again, I think what you got started here by developing those relationships with some of the particular local government is to continue talking to them, meet with them, go to some of those meetings. They just did the first part of that master plan they adopted today, the Clark County transformation. And as they said, they're going to be looking at the building code part of that title moving forward.
Certainly a great opportunity. And even just looking at those who are on the call right now, checking out, basically, we have a strong representation from members up north. I'm really interested to see how we can start leveraging some of your members to really reach out to their local officials, build that familiarity and awareness. Because again, I think so many of these issues are common that we have between North and South, and truly finding ways to strategize how to collectively bring together members of the AIA to the moments of those right discussions is going to be critical to the long-term success of our chapter as a whole. Well, appreciate everybody's time this evening, and it's on to James. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. So I just want to thank our panel tonight that was online earlier, Councilwoman Romero, Commissioner Jones, Commissioner Gibson, and Assemblyman Watts, as well as our committee chair, Christopher Lujan, and Mike Hillerby for tonight's presentation. Thank you both for really putting this all together and for leading us through this. This was an amazing presentation and really a great wrap up to our member meetings this year. So as we wrap up this year, I just wanted to highlight our AIA Nevada Design and Service Awards, as well as our AIA Las Vegas Holiday Celebration is on December 4th at the Four Seasons Resort here in Las Vegas. We're looking forward to seeing everyone, so please check out our website for tickets or contact our office. There's still tickets available, as well as some sponsorships. We want to wrap those up quickly, hopefully by this weekend. So please reach out to us. Please come out and support your fellow members this year as we celebrate the year end, as well as our awards for fantastic work being presented. So thank you again for your attendance tonight, and have a great evening.